Lately, this has been sitting with me in a strange way. I keep noticing it in the room, and then I notice it again weeks later, and sometimes months later, when a patient comes back and says, something changed, but I can't point to when. And I don't always explain this well, honestly. Even after all these years, it's hard to put into neat words because it's quiet and it doesn't look like love the way people expect it to look. When someone is falling in love with you, the loud signs usually come later. The messages, the declarations, the clarity. But the first real sign, the one that shows up before they're even aware of it themselves, happens much deeper. It happens in the nervous system. I've seen this in people in their 20s, and I've seen it in people in their 50s who swear they're too old for this nonsense. They'll sit across from me, relaxed at first, talking about work, about stress, about something unrelated. And then your name comes up, or someone else's, and their body changes before their words do. Their breathing shifts slightly, not dramatic, just different. Sometimes it slows. Sometimes it becomes shallow. They might pause mid-sentence, like their mind briefly left the room. They don't notice it, but I do. Here's the part that still surprises me, even now. When someone is falling in love, their nervous system starts tracking one specific person as relevant to safety. Not excitement, not desire, safety. They become more regulated when they imagine you, or more dysregulated when you pull away. They don't frame it that way, of course. They'll say things like, I just feel off today, or I don't know why that bothered me. But the body knows before the mind is ready to admit anything. I remember a woman once, late 30s, who kept saying, he's just a friend. And every time she said it, her shoulders tightened, her jaw set. Not because she was lying to me, but because part of her was still lying to herself. This is the silent sign most people miss, when someone starts organizing their internal world around your presence. Your mood affects theirs more than it should. Your absence creates a subtle unease they can't logically justify. It's not romantic yet. It's not even conscious. It's the nervous system quietly reassigning importance. And that process, it's fragile. It can reverse. It can deepen. It can scare people enough that they shut it down. But when it's there, it's unmistakable if you know where to look. I want to slow this down a bit, because this next part is where people usually misunderstand what's happening. They assume falling in love looks like intensity, like obsession, like constant thinking. And sometimes it does. Later. But early on, it's often much quieter than that. I don't always explain this clearly, so bear with me. When someone is falling in love with you, their attention toward you becomes strangely inconsistent, not absent, not overwhelming, inconsistent. They might seem fully present one moment and then oddly distracted the next. They might forget what they were saying mid-thought when you enter the room. Or they'll remember tiny details about you weeks later, but struggle to recall what they had for lunch yesterday. This isn't carelessness. It's the brain reallocating resources. From a psychological perspective, and I'll keep this gentle, the mind has a limited amount of attentional energy. When someone begins to matter emotionally, the brain starts running quiet background processes about them. Nothing dramatic, just constant low-level tracking. I see this a lot in people who insist they're not emotionally available. They'll say, I don't think about them that much, but then they describe monitoring your tone, your timing, your reactions. They notice if you reply slower than usual, or faster. They notice changes you didn't announce. And here's the uncomfortable part. This happens even when they don't want it to. I remember a man in his early 40s, very composed, very rational, who said, almost annoyed, I don't understand why her opinion suddenly gets under my skin. And when I asked when that started, he paused for a long time. That pause told me more than his answer. When someone is falling in love, your emotional cues start bypassing their usual filters. Things that wouldn't normally register suddenly do. Not because you're special in a dramatic sense, but because the nervous system has decided you're relevant. They may not act on it. In fact, many people pull back right here. They become slightly guarded, slightly more controlled around you. And that's another quiet sign people misread. They think distance means lack of feeling. But often, it's the opposite. It's containment. They're trying to keep something from growing before they understand it. This stage is full of internal contradiction, interest mixed with restraint, warmth followed by sudden neutrality, presence, then a step back. It's not manipulation, it's confusion. And honestly, it's one of the most human phases of attachment there is. There's something else that happens around this stage, and it's subtle enough that people almost never talk about it out loud. Even in my office, it usually comes out sideways. Someone will say, "I don't know why I'm more tired lately," or "I feel oddly on edge." But nothing is wrong. And sometimes, nothing is wrong. Something is just changing. When someone is falling in love with you, their nervous system starts rehearsing you. That's the best way I've found to say it, even though it sounds a bit strange. They'll mentally replay small interactions, not the meaningful conversations, those come later, but the ordinary ones. A look you gave them, the way you said their name, something you said casually that stuck longer than it should have, and they don't usually enjoy this part. That surprises people. I remember struggling to put this into words early in my career, because it doesn't match the romantic story we're taught. Early attachment often feels disruptive before it feels good. The brain is adjusting its predictions. The body is recalibrating what normal feels like. Clinically speaking, and I'll keep this simple, the nervous system prefers what's familiar. Falling in love introduces uncertainty. Not danger, exactly, just unpredictability. So you'll see signs like restlessness, sleep that's slightly off, energy that dips for no clear reason. They might become quieter around you, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're monitoring themselves more than usual. I once noticed this in a woman in her late 20s. She described feeling weirdly careful around someone she claimed she wasn't interested in. Her words. Weirdly careful. She didn't want to say the wrong thing, didn't want to reveal too much, didn't want to feel foolish later. That carefulness is important. When someone is falling in love, they often become more regulated for you, but less regulated inside themselves. They're holding something. And here's another part people don't like to hear. This phase can look emotionally flat from the outside. Less flirtation, less spontaneity, sometimes even less warmth. But internally, there's movement. Quiet, constant movement. They're asking questions they haven't put into language yet. Why do I care? Why does this person affect me? Do I want this to mean something? They may not answer those questions for a long time. Some never do. But the body has already started the conversation. And once that happens, things are rarely neutral again. This is usually the part where people get confused and start doubting themselves. They'll say, if they care, why do they seem different lately? More serious, more reserved, sometimes even slightly distant. And I understand why that's unsettling. I've had to sit with that discomfort myself, both professionally and personally. When someone is falling in love with you, their sense of control gets a little shaky, not outwardly, internally. They become more aware of what they could lose, even before they consciously believe there's something to lose at all. So the psyche does something protective. It slows them down. They start choosing words more carefully. They may hold back reactions they'd normally express freely. You might notice longer pauses before they respond, not because they're calculating, but because they're checking themselves. I don't always explain this well, but love, in its early stages, introduces vulnerability before it introduces pleasure, and vulnerability makes people cautious. I see this especially in people who are usually emotionally expressive. Suddenly, they're quieter around you than they are with others, more neutral, more contained, and that's often misread as disinterest. But clinically, what's happening is something like emotional bracing. Their nervous system is preparing for impact, not because you've hurt them, but because attachment always carries the possibility of being hurt. I remember a man in his early 30s who said, almost embarrassed, "I feel like I'm walking on thin ice, and nothing bad has even happened." That sentence stayed with me. When someone is falling in love, they may start pulling their emotional energy inward. They're assessing. Can I afford to feel this? Is this safe? Will this cost me something later? They won't ask you these questions. They may not even ask themselves clearly. But you'll feel the shift. Conversations might become shorter, but more intentional. Eye contact might linger, then break suddenly. They may show up reliably, but without the ease they had before. And here's something that's hard to accept. This phase can last longer than people expect. Weeks, sometimes months, especially for people who've been hurt before, especially for people who pride themselves on emotional independence. This isn't avoidance. It's hesitation mixed with care. They're not stepping away from you. They're standing very still, trying not to tip the balance of something they haven't fully named yet. There's a moment I often notice, and it's so small that people usually dismiss it, when someone stops treating you like a category and starts treating you like a variable. I know that sounds clinical. Let me soften it. Early on, we relate to people based on roles. Friend, colleague, acquaintance. We predict them. We know roughly how interactions will go. It's comfortable. When someone begins falling in love with you, those predictions stop working. And that unsettles them more than they expect. They'll say things like, "I didn't think you'd react that way," or "I don't know why that mattered to me." There's confusion in their voice, not about you, but about themselves. I don't always explain this well, but psychologically, love disrupts our internal models. The brain likes efficiency. Attachment complicates it, so you may notice them checking in more, asking questions that don't quite sound like questions. What did you mean earlier? Are you okay? Did I upset you? Not because you seem fragile, but because your emotional state has started to matter to them in a way that feels new. And here's something that surprises a lot of people. This often comes with a slight increase in self-consciousness. They might become more aware of how they look around you, more aware of their tone. They may joke less freely, or suddenly become very thoughtful before speaking. I remember a woman in her early 40s who said, laughing nervously, "I feel like I'm suddenly bad at being myself around him." That wasn't insecurity. That was adjustment. When someone is falling in love, they're renegotiating who they are with you. That takes energy. You might also notice a change in how they handle disagreement. They may soften their stance, or, strangely, become more firm than usual. Both can be signs of care. Because once you matter, they don't want to accidentally damage the connection, or they don't want to lose themselves in it. This is where ambivalence shows up most clearly. Wanting closeness, wanting distance. Sometimes in the same conversation. It can feel confusing to be on the receiving end of this. I won't minimize that. But from the inside, it feels like standing in unfamiliar terrain, trying not to make the wrong move. They're no longer relating to you automatically. They're relating to you attentively. And that shift, quiet, imperfect, a little awkward, is one of the most reliable signs that something deeper is forming. This is usually where people start asking me, quietly, almost apologetically, why does it feel heavier now? Not bad, just heavier. And I take a breath before answering, because this part is easy to misunderstand. When someone is falling in love with you, responsibility sneaks in before commitment does. Not responsibility in a moral sense, no one's promising anything yet, but emotional responsibility. They start feeling accountable for how they affect you. I don't always explain this well, but there's a shift from expression to impact. Before, they spoke freely, reacted freely. Now there's a pause where they consider how their words might land on you. You might notice them apologizing more than usual, even for small things, or explaining themselves when they didn't used to. This isn't insecurity, it's awareness. I've seen this in people who are otherwise very blunt. Suddenly they're saying, I didn't mean it like that, or I hope that didn't come across wrong. That kind of self-monitoring doesn't come from indifference. It comes from care mixed with uncertainty. There's also something else that happens here, and it's uncomfortable to admit. They may start imagining loss, not consciously, not dramatically, just fleeting thoughts. What if this ends? What if I mess this up? What if they pull away? Those thoughts don't mean they're pessimistic. They mean attachment has entered the picture. Neurologically, once someone is emotionally significant, the brain begins anticipating separation as well as connection. That's not pathology. That's bonding. So you may notice moments of unexpected seriousness. A conversation that suddenly feels more grounded, less playful, more real. Sometimes people say, they don't joke with me like they used to. And that can hurt. But often, it's because playfulness now feels like something that could risk misunderstanding. And they don't want to risk misunderstanding with you. This is the stage where people often freeze, not move forward, not move back, just hold. They're feeling the weight of something unnamed, and they don't yet know if it's safe to carry. From the outside, it can look like hesitation. From the inside, it feels like care trying to find its footing. And that's important. Because indifference doesn't feel heavy, it feels light. Forgettable. What you're sensing here, the gravity, the carefulness, is the nervous system saying, this matters now. By the time someone reaches this stage, something important has already happened, whether they ever say it out loud or not. Their nervous system has made a quiet decision, not a promise, not a plan, just a recognition. I often tell patients, and I say this carefully, love doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with orientation. Their inner world starts facing you. And I don't always explain this well, but you can feel it when it happens. There's a subtle gravity in how they show up, not dramatic presence, not intensity, just steadiness. They may not reach for you more. They may not say more. Sometimes they actually say less. But they return. They come back to conversations that mattered. They remember unresolved moments. They circle back instead of drifting away. I've noticed this across ages, late 20s, early 40s, even people well into their 60s. When someone is falling in love, they stop disappearing emotionally. Even when they physically leave, something stays engaged. There's also a quiet grief that appears here, and people don't like to talk about it. Because once someone matters, the illusion of emotional self-sufficiency cracks a little. They realize, I could be affected here. That realization humbles people. You might see them soften or become more honest than they intended. Sometimes they'll say things like, I don't usually talk about this, and then stop, surprised by themselves. This is where love becomes real, not romantic. Not because of closeness, but because of risk. And here's the part I want to be gentle with. Not everyone moves forward from here. Some people retreat. Some rationalize. Some decide it's too much. But the sign itself doesn't disappear easily. When someone is falling in love with you, they stop treating the connection as optional. Even if they pretend otherwise. Even if they resist it. Your presence has weight now. Your absence is noticed. Your emotional state leaves a trace. That's the silent sign. Not words, not gestures, but the way their internal world reorganizes around you. And if you're sensing that, even without proof, you're probably not imagining it. The body rarely lies about attachment. It just speaks more quietly than we're taught to listen.